A couple of weeks have passed and another Stephen King adaptation is in the cinemas. But what about it, you know? What about it? How many other people are going to open their video with it puns, do you think? It's been 27 years since the first adaptation of Stephen King's It came out, which coincidentally is about the amount of time that it takes Pennywise the clown to hibernate in between his massive child murder rituals. And you know, probably slightly more pressing in the minds of the people who made and funded this film, it's also roughly the amount of time it takes to replenish a cinema audience with young people who have expendable money of their own and also don't remember the original adaptation. I'm being slightly more cynical than I should be. Actually, I think there are a number of good reasons to take another stab at adapting It for the big screen this time. For one thing, the 1990 version that we all talk about is a miniseries that was originally made for TV. It's like a made-for-TV movie, essentially, that's 4 hours long. As a result, it really can't pull off a lot of what King's talking about. This evil, fear-guzzling, shape-shifting monster just isn't really achievable on a made-for-TV budget. In fact, it was barely within the reach of Hollywood at the time. On top of that, and a bit of an unforgivable sin for what's essentially a 3-hour film, the 1990s version has a pretty boring second half. So I can see the rationale for making another version of it, besides the obvious economic one, and also for making this film purely about the young kids who are the first half, essentially, of the novel. Visually, the film is bizarrely bland, often not better framed or lit than the 90s made-for-TV film they're attempting to surpass. And there's an additional layer of strangeness because the director of photography is a fantastic filmmaker. He's Chung Hoon Chung, who filmed Oldboy amongst many other films. But on the plus side, technology has moved on to a point where Pennywise the dancing clown, the world-eating, shape-shifting abomination, can be realistically portrayed on screen. Certainly more so than the stop-motion puppet-type effects that were used in the made-for-TV version. Unfortunately, that means that some of the more quiet and surreal scares of the miniseries are replaced here with jump scares and gore. In particular, the iconic opening sequence is a good example of this. Originally a deeply unsettling, quiet scene with a light moment of terror that suggested more than it showed. Pennywise himself is the greatest victim of this shift in the filmmaker's priorities. You know, far from Tim Curry's genius turn as a grubby, low-rent goof with an insatiable hunger for flesh, Skarsgård is giggling and screaming and running around far too much to really be that intimidating. His eyes roll around in his sockets, sometimes in a scary way and more frequently in a bit of a stupid one. He shudders and shakes, he dances and jumps around, and you can't help but feel that King's ethereal presence, this reality warping theory has been replaced by an overinflated scarecord living inside an overdesigned costume that looks like James Wan's wet dream. That's a bit of a shame because there are actually many reasons to recommend this film. In particular, the child actors are fantastically cast and put in really good performances. And stepping away from the truncated adaptation of the miniseries, the coming-of-age elements of King's story are able to really come to the fore. The change in time period also does no harm. Moving from the 1950s to the 1980s just means there can be a creepy kids TV show, and Henry Bowers has a mullet instead of wearing a leather jacket. It works just as well. When the film slows down and eases up on the jump scares, there's a lot of really disturbing imagery in it, which is a great thing for a horror movie. And it's here where you can really see the fingerprints of Cary Fukunaga, who was originally going to direct the film and wrote the vast majority of the screenplay that was eventually directed by Andy Muschietti, who made the interesting horror fantasy mix Mama. There are some new scares that aren't part of King's work, like a distorted figure from a painting becoming the stuff of nightmares, and some stuff that was in the original book and isn't in the miniseries, like when an oozing kind of nightmare version of a leper stalks a young boy through an abandoned house. And when the time is right for effects work and they use a bit of, well, not restraint exactly, I wouldn't really call it that, but a bit of art by the filmmakers, effects become a really big part of this movie. And we get a better rendering of King's vision than we got in previous versions. In particular, there's a moment when Pennywise does something very tricksy and horrible with a slide projector that I think is a really effective scare sequence in the film. I sometimes think that horror has a lot in common with comedies when it comes to filmmaking. After all, for a comedy to work, all it really has to do is just make the audience laugh. And for a horror to work, all it has to really do is to be scary. Several sequences of It had me sitting on the edge of my seat. Some of them were legitimately terrifying. So that's what a good horror or a good comedy has to do. But a great comedy makes you laugh when you remember bits of it. It makes you want to share the jokes from it with your family and friends. A great horror should follow you home from the cinema, stalk you all the way back to your house and then hide in the shadows at night. It doesn't do that. The horror of this film stays on the screen when you leave. And to be fair, I'm not sure exactly how much of that is just a preference for me, having seen the miniseries before I saw this one. I don't really think there's much between them. For every bit where this film could be more subtle or not rely on jump scares and gore so much, that film is really held back by the production value that it has and by the casting of the adult characters who are in it. I don't think it's a transcendent horror experience, but then I think the same is probably true of the miniseries. But this is the kind of thing where I'd love to hear your opinions about it, so please let me know in the comments down below what you made of this picture if you've seen it, your fond memories maybe of the 1990s miniseries, or any other kind of recollections and thoughts around Stephen King stuff. I know there's at least one Stephen King fan who's following the channel because you came and left the most astonishingly detailed comment about why you really liked The Dark Tower, and although I know we had a chat about why I thought you were, to be honest, totally wrong, it's really nice to see someone who knows that lore back to front, so I'd love to see what you thought of it in particular. So that's it from me. If you enjoyed the review, don't forget to click like on this video so you get suggested similar stuff, and click subscribe so you get my videos when they come out. Have a good one, see you later.